Salams from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhant Ani and you're watching this weekend show of Daily Debrief. On the show today, 1 year since the Taliban took control of the Afghan capital Kabul, 75 years since India won independence from British rule, and 100 days to go to the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. First up, a year ago this week, the Taliban forces took control over the Afghan capital Kabul, re-establishing de facto control over the country of about 40 million people. In that year, much of the large-scale fighting is ended, but the suffering of the Afghan people goes on. War was followed by natural disaster, and as we were covering on the show a couple of days ago, and the World Health Organization has now warned, mass outbreak of disease. Almost half of Afghanistan's population faces daily food insecurity, and most of the country lives below what the UN defines as the poverty line. There's been some coverage in the US press of this forgotten war, but much of it has focused on the Taliban's mentality or ideology, which we already knew all about. Very little covers the legacy of the US and NATO's 20-year engagement in the country and how much that contributed to the humanitarian disaster the Afghan people are struggling through. Prabir Purkayastha, NewsClick's editor-in-chief, outlined that very legacy. Good to have you back in the Daily Debrief studios, Prabir, after a short break. But of course, we're not talking about a very particularly bright prospect. The situation in Afghanistan, 1 year on from the withdrawal, we've seen across various sectors indicators of how bad the humanitarian crisis is at multiple levels. What is exactly going on from your reading of the situation?
You know, the crucial issue really was that once the US withdrew from Afghanistan, or shall we say they essentially abandoned Afghanistan, what has happened is that the money which was supposed to be with the Afghan government, whoever took over Afghanistan, it's about $8 billion, which was with the US Treasury, because that's where dollar accounts are kept for most countries in the world. Right. So that was seized by the United States. That's really a completely illegal act because it was not the US money to seize. Half of it was supposed to be given to 9/11 victims. Now, Taliban did not attack the United States. Taliban did not cause the damage to the American people's lives and property, which is what is supposed to be the cause, legal cause. Yeah. But in this case, half of that was supposed to be given to 9/11 victims, but only after they had withdrawn from Afghanistan. This was there all the while. This was not done at that time. And the other half is supposed to be given to aid agencies will give aid to Afghanistan. Again, it's not their money to give. It's really, again, Afghan government's money and therefore Afghan people's money. So this is an illegal act. The United States has done this earlier in Iran in 1979, has done this with Venezuela. Of course, not US, it's actually UK. It's done with Venezuelan gold. But it has also done this with the recent Ukraine war. It has also done it with Russia. So given all of this, and the fact that the Afghanistan government really, the Taliban which has come into power, has no money. It's facing a situation where the 75% of the budget of the Afghan government was paid by the United States. So suddenly it comes into power, whatever money is the coffers is not available. It's supposed to run a country which is not small. It's a country of about 40 million people. It's a large land area on top of that. It's a rugged country. Difficult terrain. And in that, this government comes in with absolutely no money in the coffers, or whatever money was there has been actually taken out by the United States. Whatever money might otherwise have been there, as you know, there are all stories of loot of the Afghan treasury bank and so on. We're not getting into that. So this is a huge issue for a country which has come in with a new government which is taken over. Whatever may be the opinion we have of this government is not the point. Point is for Afghanistan, this is the only government they have. It's not for us to choose. So having done that, handed them the country over, having lost the war, calling it a withdrawal is basically having lost the war after 20 years. Then suddenly to say, well, we have no more responsibility, it's now all yours, and whatever money we have seized it also. I think this is really something which is a double whammy. And this makes the survival of the Afghan state much more difficult. Now, for the United States, it doesn't really matter, which has always been the issue. The US comes, fights in Iraq, fights in Libya, fights in other places, has a war effort in Syria. We can see lines of tankers going from Syrian oil wells to somewhere else. So we see all of that the US does. At the end of it, they don't do any of this. So, they don't own the mess. Afghanistan is also similar. They carried out a 20-year-long war. And at the end of it, it's Afghan people and the surrounding countries that have to now see the aftermath of the war and how do the Afghan people survive. The central government is broke. There is a lot of guns in the country, and there is to put together a semblance of a governance is also difficult because you have to give food to the people, you have to give education, you have to pay salaries. Where is the money going to come from?
Right.
So this is the crux of the issue, and the fact that the US has forgotten about Afghanistan.
Completely
Nobody
washed its
talks
hands.
about it anymore. Forget washing hands.
Except in one particular context, which is examining the Taliban's policies in a certain sort of aspect, but not looking at the fact that perhaps, like you were mentioning, the handing over de facto of power was also their own decision.
That's very, very interesting to say that, because all the reports of 1 year of Afghanistan, people going to Afghanistan, covering it, say how the women are being treated, how the women's rights have been taken away. Of course, if Taliban comes into power, it's not surprising that has happened. How the people who fought with the American army, how they are trying to run away out of Afghanistan, how the people who are anti-Taliban, what is their state, but not one word about is there food available in the country, is the basic electricity being provided, is the ability to move, for instance, vehicles, petrol, diesel, are these available? Is medicine available? Are the hospitals working? I don't see that as a focus. The focus is only on what the US wants to say. Taliban is anti-women. Of course, we know that.
Yes.
But they were anti-women at a time when you supported them against Soviet Union. From 70s or 79 onwards, 78 onwards, you've been supporting the Taliban over there. So suddenly to discover today after 40 years that they're anti-women is not something that is a great discovery. But the point is that as long as you run away from Afghanistan, you have a certain responsibility because you fought a 20-year war against Soviet Union and the Afghan government at that point of time. Not probably 20 years, probably 12 years, 13 years war from 78 onwards to about 92 when Taraki was removed. But after that, after about 8-9 years, you again entered re-engaged, you entered Afghanistan formally and took over the country. You took the responsibility of running it, and you have no more responsibility after you have run away from it. The only thing you have done in this period is actually carried out airstrikes. Even your forces which were there were really in armed enclaves, not operating on the ground, and operating from the air. You've killed more than 20,000 people in what would be called illegal acts of war. Because these are assassinations carried out from the war. This is not actually a war that was taking place on the ground. So the US never owns up to these responsibilities. That is what we see after country. Who then takes the responsibility? It's the surrounding countries, because they have to live with Afghanistan. They have to live with the fact if there is a failed state in their midst, and there is 40 million people, a lot of them will then leave as refugees. How do you handle it? What happens if lawlessness of certain kind grow over there? We already have Islamic, this IS, Khorasan, which is being talked about. They've even attacked the Afghanistan Taliban senior officials as well. So all of this, who then handles it? It becomes the responsibility of Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan and Iran. All of them have problems with various sections in Afghanistan, also with Taliban. But then it becomes their responsibility. And the one who did all this is, well, other side of the world.
And in 20 years also, none of this critical infrastructure has obviously been developed, which has led us to, let's say, for example, the WHO coming up with its report and saying the kind of challenge that whoever is the government has to deal with. What will be the implication then on the region, Prabir, and how do you see the at least medium term future?
You see, the point is, again, that do the surrounding region then see that it is their joint responsibility to solve this problem, and can they intercede with international organizations as well as in the United States? Will you foot some of the bill? And this is the key issue. How do you provide the money to Taliban? Because on one hand you say they have to behave in a certain way. On the other hand, they don't have anything except guns at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very volatile situation that's there. And let's face it, 75% of the budget of the Afghan government was met by the United States. That has now gone to zero. The money that was there in their coffers, which could have been a short-time buffer, that is not there. So how does an Afghan government, led by whoever it is, can really stabilize the country is a very, very difficult question. So ultimately, it is the neighboring countries who, afraid that this might have severe repercussions on them, will have to cough up the money. And partly, in this case, China, because they are also, Xinjiang is not very far from Afghanistan. They have a small border as well. So how do they actually stabilize Afghanistan is a big challenge. Unfortunately, the US can play the spoiler, but it does not seem to be willing to play a constructive role. Yes, 20 million people are facing starvation. The huge numbers are facing disease. So it's a very, very hard situation for all of us. And let's face it, for Pakistan, this is not a happy situation
At
either.
all, yeah.
They're in fact, they have more Pashtuns in Pakistan than they have in Afghanistan. So that's also could be a source of problem for them. And India cannot also take solace in this zero-sum game. Pakistan's problem is my gain. That's not the way it goes.
Yeah.
So I think it's in everybody's interest to see how we can stabilize Afghanistan. And the West, the NATO particularly, because they keep on talking about NATO and NATO and NATO.
Yeah.
NATO has a responsibility because US didn't come alone to Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
It came as NATO as well. So I think that is the responsibility they have to take. Not simply, talking about Ukraine, but what about the countries that you have invaded? What is it that you have done? I think that stock taking has to be there. And what are you going to do about it today?
Thanks very much, Prabir. The 75th anniversary of India's independence from British rule is on Monday, the 15th of August. After 200 years of colonial enslavement by perhaps the most extractivist of extractivist regimes, India won the right to self-determination. Celebrations of the big day have been on for the entire year. The right-wing Hindu nationalist government of Narendra Modi has run multiple nationwide campaigns, including one to put a national flag in every home. But the celebrations are taking place in a country facing serious challenges and not a little uncertainty. Religious divides and polarization is increasingly overt and widespread. The economy is reeling after the pandemic and small and medium businesses are nowhere near recovery. Unemployment is at record levels and inflation close to double digits. Before we get into those aspects of the present, Pragya is joining us to talk about, Pragya, what the values were that united this very diverse country and brought it together to achieve this task of getting rid of the British.
Right, Siddhant, it's a very big anniversary, 75 years of independence for India. So we got independence on 15th of August 1947, and that independence was a result of this freedom struggle. Now, it's not possible to really put a date on when that struggle began, but 1885, when the Congress Party was founded, is actually a turning point. Now, this party was founded by a British civil servant, A.O. Hume, who had thought that it would be a great way for the Indians to vent their political anxieties.
The safety valve theory.
Yeah, but of course, it ended up becoming a lot more than that. Now, in 1857 as well, Indians had rebelled against the British Empire, but the expression of India as a nation, as a political entity, did begin after 1885. Now, by the 1890s, there was a lot of discord already in India between the two major communities, the Hindus and the Muslims. But in 1905, the British decided to partition Bengal, on community lines, meaning that one province which is Hindu majority and the other which is other Bengal, which is Muslim majority. Right. So this actually galvanized, it became a catalyst to turn the freedom struggle into a nationwide political mass movement. The reason was that the leaders of the mass movement were unwilling to accept a communitarian or divisive idea of what their nation would be. Now, what also happened was that in fact, at that time, Lord Curzon, who was a viceroy of Bengal, he said that divided Bengal would pull in different directions. And that is exactly what happened, meaning that the British were already facing resistance from Indians, from the freedom movement, and those forces only kept growing over time, despite other measures taken by the British to divide India along religious lines. The other important aspect to remember is that the Hindu right at that time was not trying to unify the nation against British, but to unify the Hindu community. And the Muslim League, which claimed to represent the interests of the Muslims of undivided India, was doing the same. So the legacy of the freedom movement, also another important, the unique feature of Indian independence was that, you had Gandhi returned from South Africa and, where he led a resistance against racism against the Indians. And his return marked the beginning of passive resistance. So, of course, passive resistance is an idea accepted all over the world today, but which is not to say that there were no armed struggles against the British. Yeah. There were people, there were peasantry who was revolting, there were tribals, there were indigenous groups who were revolting, and there was one revolt which is being talked about a lot these days, which is the revolt of the naval sailors in Bombay. Which everybody joined in. So by the time the Second World War ended, Great Britain had emerged from that war as Britain. And by 1942, Indians had launched the Quit India movement. So there was really no scope left for the British to survive here. And the whole idea of the independence movement was to create this mosaic of different communities, religions, regions, all fighting against the oppression of the British, which was at odds with what the Hindu right and to an extent the Muslim right were fighting for.
75 years on, Pragya, we're hearing a lot of talk. The Commonwealth Games were on recently, and if you look at all of the hype around it, you hear a lot of talk of New India.
Right.
So is there a breakaway from those values that at that point united this nation as a political entity and where we are heading today?
Yeah, Siddhant, in certain sense, yes. Because the freedom movement was not just about struggle, it was also about fashioning the kind of Indian and the kind of India you wanted. So there was a movement against untouchability. But the crimes against the lowest strata of Indians, the Dalits or the scheduled castes, who fall on the lowest end of the hierarchy in the traditional Hindu hierarchy.
They do not belong, in fact.
Yes. So, the atrocities against them are rising. It was 9.6% during the pandemic when people were locked up in their homes. Similarly, the other aim of the national movement was to indigenize, to have a national industry, to have a public sector, which would then, create a force that would invest in India, in Indians, and India would be self-reliant. We do not have that happening right now. Even if everything else can be debated, what is not debatable at all is that, every global report, every Indian study shows that inequality in India is extremely high, and equality for all citizens was definitely an aim of the national movement. So we are falling behind. While we have come a very long way, we are falling behind on some of these ideals. In particular, the Hindu right is in power. The same Hindu right that was uniting the Hindus in the past is now trying to do the same. It is creating conflict within our society, which is, the other problem is that the promises that are made by politics and the lived experience of people, meaning the unemployment you referred to, right? Meaning that the lack of civil and social services, the lack of employment is actually one of the biggest problems that people face today. So the claims made by politics and the lived reality of people do not match. And whenever that happens, it is unequivocally a source of conflict, a source of discord, and a source of unhappiness. So these are things which India will certainly have to confront in coming days.
Alongside the celebrations, no doubt.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks very much for that, Pragya. And finally, it's about 100 days to go before the kickoff of the biggest sporting spectacle on the planet, the FIFA World Cup. I know some of you will take offense to that, no doubt, but like at least as far as broadly speaking, the world is concerned, it's the one sporting event that draws the maximum amount of global attention, both on and off the pitch. It's the first time the World Cup is being held in the Arab world. Qatar is hosting. It's the first time the World Cup is being held in the winter. You already, of course, know all of this. But with 100 days to go, what is it that we are looking forward to the most on and off the pitch? We talk about in this last segment of Daily Debrief for the day. Jaideep, thank you so much for joining us on Daily Debrief. You're of course, a veteran of having covered several FIFA World Cups. And the next one is just about or less than 100 days now. Qatar will play Ecuador in 99 days from today in the 2022 FIFA World Cup finals. The last one with 32 teams, of course. I have to ask you, starting point, France are the holders of the tournament, and exciting for them to be going in with the addition of Karim Benzema to their squad. Can they become the third country to win back-to-back World Cups, or how are you looking at it? What are you excited about?
See, from the potential point of view, they of course have the potential. There is no doubt to win it back-to-back World Cups. But World Cup is always full of surprises. That is the problem. So, but again, World Cup. See, previously it was confined to 6 or 7 teams. Thankfully, from 99 onwards, a couple of more teams, 98 onwards, a couple of more teams have joined the show. France and Spain have also won it. Previously, I think half a dozen teams who always won it.
Yeah.
So, even if France doesn't want to win it, no, look, I'm saying what I mean to say that France, whether it is with Karim Benzema or without him, even France has the ability to win it again because they are a very fine side. There is no doubt about it. So, but it will remain confined to half a dozen teams or 8 teams in the frame. That's what I feel. If anyone outside it comes a new winner comes, that will be a big surprise. It has happened. It has happened in the last 20 years. It has happened. 25 years. It has happened. 98 France won, 2010 Spain won. They were all new wins. But again was heavily favorite. Being outsiders, not in the bracket of those who always win the World Cup. That Spain will win the World Cup, everybody predicted. And even they lost the first match against Switzerland, if you remember. The team was so good that everybody thought that doesn't matter, David Boy. So I think, Spain. Coming back to your question, France do have the ability to win it again.
All right. Fair enough. Anything else you're particularly looking forward to, Jaideep, on the pitch?
See, what is happening, most of people are looking to... this World Cup has several stars who will be playing for the last time. Unique thing of this World Cup. Whether it is Messi or Ronaldo or Suarez or so many are there. They may be playing for the last time in their career. So a lot of people maybe they are fans. See, they have done so well at the club level. I am also, of course, I am looking forward to watch some good football from them on all teams. But I am also looking forward to see if some new names come out. See, in the previously there used to be a lot of new names used to come up. For the simple reason, people had no clue about the club football those days.
Yeah.
If Pele was doing wonder at the age of 17 or 18 in Brazil, none of us, I don't think anybody, I was not there, of course, anything in that era was much aware of what is happening in Brazilian that Santos is doing in. But nowadays, everybody, there is surprise left. But still, hoping against hope, there one or two players will come up who will really surprise all of us, and we'll have then we'll have we can enjoy the world more in that case.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think for so much of the world which watches from the perspective of being a neutral fan, those are the things you really look forward to. And I think actually we'll stick for on this occasion, Jaideep, to this on pitch kind of assessment of what we are looking forward to, because there is of course lots else to talk about, including allegations of sports washing against Qatar, human rights, and all kinds of things, and the various media narratives. But we now have 100 days to build up to that. So for now, we leave it at this. Jaideep, thanks again for your time and joining us on Daily Debrief. All right, that does it for this week's coverage of the news on Daily Debrief. We'll be back again on Tuesday with our next episode. Monday, of course, is the day we celebrate India's independence, so we're luckily getting a day off. But for more details on all of these stories, as always, head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll see you next week. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.